Thank you for coming to the emergent and urgent intersection between drug policy and environmental justice and climate justice. It is a great pleasure to host this session with my distinguished speakers and our co-sponsors. So today we will hear from Bewley-Taylor, founding director of the Global Drug Policy Observatory, an impact-oriented research unit with the School of Social Sciences at Swansea University in the UK. Rebeca, who is the Brazilian lead for the International Coalition for Drug Policy Reform and Environmental Justice. We are not entirely sure if our colleague Daniela Diaz, project coordinator at SOS Amazonia, is going to be able to make it. There's a few technical issues, but fingers crossed she'll be able to make it. Welcome, Marta. And Sandra and Bermudez, director of Viso Mutop in Colombia. And a very warm welcome to Marta Machado, who is the National Secretary for Drug Policy, the Ministry of Justice and Public Security in Brazil. Very warm welcome to everybody. So I'm your host. My name is Clemmie James. I am the Senior Policy and Campaigns Officer at Health Poverty Action and the Coordinator for the International Coalition for Drug Policy Reform and Environmental Justice. So, little introduction to this subject. Somebody made a comment to me yesterday that the environment was very popular this year at the CND. Well, watch this space. It's going to get more pressing. As we catapult towards climate chaos, a significant amount of the global effort will be focused on protecting, restoring and regulating nature, particularly the tropics, a region that captures the largest amount of our planet's CO2 above ground, therefore central to reducing carbon emissions. But you cannot protect nature while a multi-billion-dollar unregulated, violent trade runs through it. Over the next few years, be very alert to a very convincing and very popular narrative that will be presented to you, that drug trafficking is environmental crime. But growing a plant, specifically if it is indigenous to a region, or transporting a brick of cocaine in and of itself need not cause any environmental harm or could be mitigated. But by making those actions illegal, pushing them underground, removing all forms of accountability to that entire supply chain and those in charge of it, has caused a complex web of harm upheld by state and non-state actors. But here's the irony that we need to be really alert to. The drugs trade in its current unregulated configuration is also a barrier to addressing the real environmental crimes, such as illegal deforestation, because the trade erodes governance and corrupts governance. So when there is a policy choice to be made by a government entity corrupted by the drugs trade in regions key to our global future, will public funds be used to mitigate floods, or put out wildfires, or stop illegal logging? Will public health systems or food systems be safeguarded for the poorest in those regions as the climate crisis intensifies? No. If those state officials have skin in the game, or indeed work for or with organised crime groups, they will deliver policies that promote and maintain the illicit drugs trade because they profit from its success. Instead, they will pass laws to build infrastructure like highways into the heart of virgin rainforests and indigenous land that enables a smooth running of the drugs trade. The drug policies and the trade that they have produced are a barrier to strong climate governance that we all desperately need. So in the next 18 months, the world's eyes will be on the Amazon at the climate COP in November 2025, and it won't be possible to ignore these dynamics any longer. It will also not be possible to ignore the central tenet of this circus, the UNODC. Prohibition undermines the objective of other UN agencies and bodies that are collectively trying to mitigate, adapt, and deliver climate justice. We need an intersectional, decolonized and reparative reconfiguration of how a trade this size is run. And this is not radical. This is essential to our future existence. So it is now my pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Bewley-Taylor.
Thank you, Clemmie. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to keep my remarks brief, very brief, hopefully. My aim is hopefully quite simple. It's to try and set the scene for today's session, but also to try and contextualize the growing discussion within Vienna on the drugs environment nexus, or whatever we want to call this increasingly important component of what's still sometimes vaguely referred to as the world drug problem. And just to pick up on some of Clemmie's points, in recent years, we have witnessed a welcome increase in attention given to the issue. So see, for example, the focus of the UNODC's work, the growing number of side events this year, and as Clemmie said, probably in the future, increasing mention within member state statements or interventions, including during the high-level segment last week, and prominence within the annual resolution on alternative development, and then within that to the links to the attainment of the SDGs in 2030. And also, I think it's worth noting the kind of disappointing, but there is limited mention within the high-level declaration that was agreed last week. Now, within all this, or within most of this discourse, there's a recognition of an improved understanding of both the direct and I think crucially the indirect impact of the illicit drug market on the environment, and the related emergence of concepts labelled narco-deforestation, narco-cattle, and indeed narco-penetration into a range of activities in places like the Amazon basin. So whether you like the terminology or not, these are sorts of concepts that we're dealing with now. It's possible to argue that there still remains a lack of emphasis on the environmental impact of policy interventions designed to address these and other areas of what's been called convergent crime. But I think it certainly would be churlish to ignore the positive steps that are being made. That said, at this relatively early stage in this developing discourse, I think it's worth stepping back a bit to consider how the topic is being framed. And it seems clear that there's a tendency to focus on what's sometimes called the crime environment ecosystem. And such criminologically oriented perspective with a focus on criminal markets and criminal actors is an inevitable product of how the topic's perceived and how the favoured analytical lens is deployed. Now, in-depth analysis of an array of interconnecting illegal markets and behaviours of a range of criminal actors operating within them is, of course, important and potentially illuminating. Yet, this shouldn't be at the expense of meaningful discussion of harm to affected communities, and crucially, I think, states' obligations to protect them and indeed, interrelatedly, protect the environment itself. Now, other disciplinary approaches or frameworks, if you want to look at it like that, exist, and of course, mindful of the growing appreciation of the crucial link between Vienna and Geneva, a strong case can be made that particularly appropriate lens is that of human rights and environmental protection. And this was a key point raised at the excellent side event this morning, the right to a healthy environment and drug policies. And moreover, the approach of green criminology also has the potential to simultaneously shift the attention away from criminal markets and criminal actors and raise the profile of victims' rights. So with a focus on harm and victimization, careful application of green criminology can function as an entry point for engagement with a range of key issues that intersect with many of the concerns of other approaches, including those focusing on human rights. Again, as we've heard, and as I hope we continue to hear, issues that are particularly important in the Amazon basin. And if you look at human rights as a series of sub-regimes, if you like, we should focus as well on indigenous rights. And as such, with what we might want to call considerable productive power to set agendas and shape narratives within international drug control debates, I think it's encouraging to see the UNODC engage with green criminology. This should certainly be regarded as a promising and potentially rewarding move, particularly if there is more of an emphasis on the impact of policy interventions on the environment. It's not, however, though, without its problems, and this relates to the fundamentally critical nature of green criminology and its appreciation and focus on the overarching structures of harm. And to be sure, and just to pick up on Clemmie's point, whichever way you look at it, but I think particularly in light of the considerable indirect impact of the illicit market on the environment, it's becoming ever more difficult to ignore the harm generated by the overarching prohibitive framework within which states operate. And ignoring this reality severely inhibits the truly holistic and integrated analysis necessary for an issue that extends far beyond this corner of the UN system. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, David. Okay, so our next speaker, we're going to zoom into the Amazon. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. I speak today in Spanish. And she's going to translate for us. Thank you.
Desde hace un poco más de 10 años, Viso Mutop trabaja en la Amazonía colombiana y desde esa época hemos visto, vivido y documentado su proceso de poblamiento, sus dinámicas, sus conflictos socioambientales y la manera como el Estado se aproxima a este territorio y a las personas que viven allí. Durante el último año nos hemos enfocado en ver qué variables están determinando ahora con mayor intensidad la pérdida de bosque de uno de los ecosistemas más importantes del mundo y con mayor biodiversidad. Es relevante para nosotros ver qué tanto aportan los cultivos de coca a la deforestación y cómo la implementación de la política de drogas dinamiza un ciclo constante que perpetúa la dinámica coca, ampliación de la frontera agropecuaria, coca. Queremos compartir con ustedes algunas conclusiones que muestran que en la Amazonía colombiana efectivamente hay un riesgo y en esto inciden distintos factores.
Viso Mutop has been working in the Colombian Amazon for a little over 10 years. We have seen, lived, and documented the process by which it was settled, its socio-environmental dynamics and conflicts, and the way the state approaches this territory and the people who live there. During the last year, we have focused on identifying what variables determine, now with greater intensity, the loss of forest in one of the most important ecosystems in the world, and with the greatest biodiversity. It is important for us to see how much coca cultivation contributes to deforestation and how the implementation of drugs policy dynamizes a constant cycle that perpetuates the mutually reinforcing dynamic that takes us from coca to the expansion of the agricultural frontier back to coca. We would like to share some conclusions that show that the Amazon is indeed at risk, and this is due to several factors.
Next, please. El mercado global de drogas y la política pública son determinantes para la región y para sus habitantes, especialmente para campesinos e indígenas. Desde finales de los años 70, la coca era el principal sustento de población que buscando tierra se ubicó en el norte amazónico. Hoy la coca está en otras regiones del país, pero persiste su presencia en la Amazonía. Como pueden observar en este mapa, evidentemente hay una deforestación asociada a cultivos de coca. Sin embargo, el impacto de la coca entre 2014 y 2022 en deforestación es menor que otras actividades económicas, algunas de ellas también ilegales. La coca solo aporta el 7% a la deforestación de la región.
The global drug market and global drug policy are determining factors for the region and its inhabitants, especially for peasants and indigenous people. Since the end of the 1970s, coca was the main source of livelihood for the population, which, in search of land, moved to the northern Amazon. Today, coca is in the regions of the country, but in other regions of the country, but it persists in the Amazon. As you can see in this map, map 1, there is evidently deforestation associated with coca crops. But however, the impact of coca on deforestation between 2014 and 2022 is less than other economic activities, some of them also illegal. Coca only contributes 7% to the deforestation in the region.
Otro elemento relevante que pueden ver en la imagen es que a partir de la firma del Acuerdo de Paz de 2016, firmado entre la guerrilla de las FARC y el gobierno colombiano, la deforestación se incrementó a tasas nunca antes vistas. Una vez la guerrilla salió de sus territorios y estos no fueron copados por el Estado, las mafias que lavan dinero a través de tierras y ganadería vieron una despensa y una oportunidad en la región.
Another relevant element, which we can also see in this image, is that since the 2016 peace agreement signed between the FARC guerrilla and the Colombian government, deforestation increased at rates never before. Once the guerrillas left these territories and the state did not move to control them, the mafias that launder money through land and cattle ranching saw a repository of food and an opportunity in the region.
Lo que pasa aquí es que el bosque y toda la biodiversidad que posee cada hectárea de Amazonía es tumbado para convertirse principalmente en praderas, que terminan siendo el hábitat de ganadería extensiva, que no es otra cosa distinta a una dinámica de acaparamiento de tierras, como pueden ver en el mapa. La deforestación asociada a praderización ha logrado aportar en algunos periodos hasta el 77% del total de la deforestación de la región, y de estos cerca del 50% se han convertido en pastos para ganadería. El hato ganadero ha llegado a 3 millones de cabezas de ganado y el incremento de las fincas con más de 500 cabezas de ganado en los últimos 5 años ha sido del 33%. Esto no es nada distinto a un proceso de latifundización.
What is happening here is that the forest and all the biodiversity that each hectare of the Amazonia possesses is being cut down to become mainly grasslands, which will end up being the habitat of extensive cattle ranching. This is nothing else than a dynamic of land grabbing, as can be seen in this map. Deforestation associated with forest clearing and the creation of grasslands has contributed in some periods to up to 77% of the total deforestation in the region. And about 50% of this is converted into pasture for cattle ranching. The total cattle herd has reached 3 million heads of cattle. In the last years, the increase of farms with more than 500 heads of cattle was of 33%. This is nothing else than a process in which the large estates are being developed.
En los últimos 7 años, la deforestación en la Amazonía colombiana está asociada principalmente a praderización, implica varias cosas. La expansión de la frontera agropecuaria, el crecimiento descontrolado del hato ganadero, el acaparamiento de tierras sobre áreas ambientalmente protegidas, principalmente sobre la zona de reserva forestal y los parques nacionales naturales. Los cultivos de coca indudablemente contribuyen a la expansión de la frontera agropecuaria, pero la implementación de la política de drogas punitiva incrementa el problema. En la medida que cultivar coca es una actividad criminalizada, los campesinos siembran sus cultivos en lo más profundo de la selva. Esto significa, por un lado, que los cultivos se convierten en punta de lanza de la ampliación de la frontera agrícola y que las familias y comunidades son doblemente criminalizadas por cultivar coca y ahora por deforestar el bosque donde se sembrarán los nuevos cultivos, sin que el Estado les garantice sus derechos.
In the last 7 years, deforestation in the Colombian Amazon has been mainly associated with the expansion of the agricultural frontier, the uncontrolled growth of the extensive cattle herding, and land grabbing in environmentally protected areas, mainly in the forest reserve zones and in national natural parks. Coca crops contribute to the expansion of the agricultural frontier, but the implementation of a punitive drug policy increases the problem. To the extent that growing coca is a criminalized activity, farmers plant their crops in the deepest parts of the jungle. This means, on the one hand, that the crops become the spearhead of the expansion of the agricultural frontier, and that families and communities are doubly criminalized for growing coca and now for deforesting the forest where they will plant their new crops without any kind of right guarantee by the state.
La persistencia durante largos periodos de tiempo de cultivos de coca en esta región se asocia a que los problemas del campesinado siguen siendo los mismos de siempre y se resumen en el aislamiento de los centros donde se prestan servicios y se toman decisiones y el poco e incluso a veces inexistente acceso a derechos fundamentales.
The persistence over long periods of time of coca crops in this region is associated with the fact that the problems of the peasantry continue to be the same as always and can be summarized as isolation from the centers where services are provided and decisions are made, and little and sometimes even non-existent access to fundamental rights.
Finally, es importante que la política de drogas dialogue con la política ambiental, pero sobre todo con la de desarrollo territorial, con la de acceso a derechos de miles de familias y comunidades cultivadoras de coca, quienes siguen siendo perseguidas y aún no se les resuelve un problema fundamental como el acceso, el uso y la tenencia de sus tierras. Que el prohibicionismo siga definiendo la ruta de trabajo institucional, lo único que hace es seguir presionando a la gente hacia el fondo de la selva, territorios controlados por actores armados ilegales, quienes regulan los mercados de manera violenta. Esto abre las puertas a la criminalidad organizada que desde hace años viene transitando entre economías mixtas entre lo ilícito y lo lícito por el control del territorio. Abre las puertas a un desmesurado acaparamiento de tierras y agrava la problemática socioambiental, postergando salidas dignas para las poblaciones.
Finally, it's important that drug policy is in dialogue with environmental policy, but above all with the territorial development policy and to the access to rights for thousands of coca-growing families and communities who continue to be persecuted and still have not seen resolved fundamental problems such as access, use, and tenure of land. Prohibitionism continues to define the institutional worker. This means it continues to push people towards the bottom of the jungle, to territories controlled by illegal armed actors who violently regulate the markets. This opens the doors to organized crime, which for years has been moving between mixed economies, between the illicit and the licit for the control of the territory, opening the doors to an excessive land grabbing and aggravating the socio-economic environmental problems, postponing a dignified solution for the populations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you, Adria, for helping us with the translation. So we're going to move from Colombia to Brazil, and Rebecca, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Clemmie. Thanks, Sandra. And you as well. Well, I'm here to present a little bit about this intersection between land use and prohibition as a key part of the struggle for climate justice in Brazil and South America. Next. Just to give a little bit of context, this is not a new story. It's an old phenomenon in the Amazon and in Brazil as a whole, violation of territorial and human rights, and deforestation. But in recent years, we saw an aggravated scenario where multiple trafficking networks are conflating and making the situation even worse, especially with another in demand for high valued forest commodities like gold and cocaine. And it's also important to notice what we are dealing with in terms of the legacy from the previous government. So in 4 years, we had more than a 50% increase in Amazon deforestation, and that's linked to a series of policies and measures related to governance over land use and land tenure, and also to the changes in legislation around the possession of firearms and guns. So on this map, you can see the arch of deforestation, which is the yellow line, and the yellow dots are shooting clubs that you need to register to be able to have a gun in Brazil. And you can see how they multiply around the deforestation arch and inside more remote forest areas in the last 4 years. So just to give a little background and overview on the main economies that directly drive Amazon deforestation, because Brazil does not produce coca leaf and does not produce cannabis. So We have other drivers there, and the main one is land grabbing or the invasion of lands illegally, especially non-assigned public forests, which are forests belonging to the state that have not been designated or protected yet. Illegal logging as one of like the first economic activity to reach native forest areas, followed by livestock and agriculture frontier, especially cattle ranching and soy production. Is estimated that 70% of illegally deforested areas in the Amazon are destined for cattle. Also the ore and illegal mining industries, Pará State, the Amazon Pará State is the largest iron ore exporter in Brazil, and 3 out of 4 hectares mined in Brazil are located inside the Amazon. Also, all the infrastructure works like roads, ports, silos to store grains, hydroways, landing strips for planes, all this infrastructure benefits these multi-trafficking networks and forest products produced in illegally deforested areas. And this is the main contributor to the climate emergency in Brazil, as almost half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from, misuse of land and deforestation. I always like to talk about the other biomes because we talk a lot about the Amazon, but Brazil is not only the Amazon. And these other forest systems like the Cerrado, the Pantanal wetlands, and the Atlantic rainforest, they are also under increasing pressure of agricultural activities, illegal deforestation and degradation, and also are important trafficking routes for these transnational chains of forest products, agricultural products, mining products, weapons, human trafficking, and so on and so forth. So the communities that live in those other biomes, indigenous communities, fishermen communities, they're also facing increased pressure from criminals, and because of their lack of territorial rights, they are also vulnerable. And we need to say that the Lula administration, the current government, is putting a lot of effort on gaining control over deforestation again, and is showing very promising results for the Amazon. So we had a significant reduction in the first year, also in the Atlantic rainforest. However, the situation in the Cerrado and other areas is still very critical, and the violence indicators remain very high. So even if deforestation levels are falling, the criminal landscape is established and is not really changing because of the efforts to control deforestation. So when we talk about violence and organized crime in the Amazon region, we are talking about the fact that the Amazon is a hero for this multi-trafficking, not only drugs, but all these other commodities, including biodiversity and weapons. We have this overlaps between environmental and non-environmental offenses like fraud, extortion, corruption, etc. We have rising homicide rates in the region as well, and now 10 of the 30 most violent cities in Brazil are located in the Amazon region. We have a situation of like an absence of territorial rights, so land is not distributed to the communities, indigenous lands are not demarcated, biological reserves are not created, and that makes these communities more vulnerable to criminal activities and to be recruited into the illegal deforestation industry, because it is an industry. Illegal deforestation is an industry in Brazil based on the illegal invasion of lands. That led to a record of land conflicts, almost 6,000 land conflicts registered in 4 years. And we see that the Amazon states in Brazil, all of them have GDPs well below national average. Like Pará, the main exporter of mining products and one of the main exporters of soy, its GDP is like half, a little bit over half the national average. And several researchers and studies are saying that the criminal landscape is increasingly fragmented. So it's not like major cartels and major organizations, but they're getting smaller and smaller and more specialized in logistics. And, you know, when I read the narco-deforestation papers from the UNODC, this paragraph really caught my eye because, and this is something that we really need to bear in mind, that the same corridor is designed to expand the agricultural use, facilitate the penetration of the drug economy and not the other way around. It's not the drug economy that drives this, it's the other way around. And I put this map here because we talk a lot about Colombia, Mexico, and Central America. Now, Brazil is a route. It is a key route, especially to Europe. And we need to bear that in mind. And also, Brazil is a very large consumer of drugs, including cocaine and crack cocaine. It's a million people market. So I would like to see Brazil featured highly when we talk about this situation and not only as a transit route. And so having worked on climate and land issues since the 90s and on drug policy since 2008, I think if we don't face this intersection, we are going to lose it. And this is because this general narrative on organized crime in the Amazon misses the point on how prohibition empower environmental criminals and how this, as the same failed war on drugs model is increasingly reproduced in the Amazon region, we see the same negative indicators arise. So we see that between 2016 and 2022, the number of police killings went up 71% in the region, and the incarceration index went up 35%. And the people that are being killed and incarcerated are Black youth, poor kids from the small communities, including a rise in indigenous arrests, right? So we are reproducing a failed model that's making the same profile of people suffer. And if you look at who is being incarcerated, as I put some data there, majority are Black, young, male, under 30 years old, not finished elementary school, and unarmed. And this is a very important figure that in only 13% of the arrests, there was any sign of previous engagement with organized crime. So that indicates that the recruiting for the cartels is happening inside overcrowded jails. They are not arresting members of criminal organizations. The criminal organizations are operating inside the jails to get their labor force. I'm sorry, I'm speaking really fast. Just gonna take a deep breath. Okay. And to deal with this issue, I think we need to look closely at the two main kind of plant-based drug commodities in Brazil, because they are commodities, which is cocaine, because the Brazilian Amazon, as you know, is bordering the three countries that produce virtually all the coca base in the world, which is Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru. And because of that, we play a very important role in the division of the clandestine labor related to the international chain of production and distribution of cocaine. And also the extent of the structure to refine cocaine in Brazil, the size of the industry to refine cocaine in Brazil is unknown, as the UNODC themselves recognize and write in their report. So how can you control an industry that you don't know how big it is, how much it's profiting, how many people it employs, And also we need to talk about the cannabis issue, which is related to a lot of racial violence in Brazil. I don't know if you know, but Brazil was one of the first countries to prohibit cannabis in the world 5 years before the US. And that really goes back to the slavery foundations of the country. And it's the most consumed illicit drug, and responds to a third of drug crime arrests in the country are for cannabis use and possession, and not even dealing. And it's coming from monoculture and big farms in Paraguay. So we are playing kind of this colonial game with our own neighbor, Paraguay. So because of all of that, this is kind of a message that I wanted to leave. Like, we know that the climate emergency is real. We are feeling it. And protecting the Amazon, the people of the Amazon, and the other forest biomes in Brazil is key to planetary survival. And prohibition policies violate rights, foster environmental crime, and hinder zero deforestation efforts. For me, it's a contradiction in itself. How can you have zero deforestation and a war against plant-based drugs? So there is no climate justice while there's an ongoing war against plant-based drugs. And just a final comment, you know, after almost 30 years as an activist and journalist focusing on human rights, I just think maybe it's time for us to say yes to drugs and no to the climate crisis, you know, for a change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the amazing presentation. So now Marta's been very flexible and is going to speak next. And Marta was meant to do the closing statement, but we have a colleague who is in Brazil, who works with SOS Amazonia, and I'm really keen that she gets to speak, but there's been a delay for her to get to where she needs to be. So thank you, Marta, for doing this and for joining us.
Thank you, Clemmie. I sit here representing the Brazilian Secretary of Drug Policy, and I'm really grateful to help Poverty Action for organizing this meeting. And I sit also here in the spirit that it's the importance of the problem we have in our hands, the importance of addressing the intersection of environmental and drug policies requires a big alliance between countries and also between civil society and governments. I think this nexus holds significant implications for the vast biodiversity of the Amazon rainforest. It's critical, it has a critical role in mitigating climate change and the importance of protecting the communities that inhabit these territories. I think the who came before me because they made the work much easier for me. They were great presentations, so I will be a little bit repetitive, but okay. There has been, as we've been discussing, an expressive increase in drug trafficking routes in the Amazon region, with illicit drug trafficking amplifying an array of other criminal economies in the territory. This convergence of crimes is driving widespread environmental destruction, often intertwined with illegal mining, land grabbing, wildlife trafficking, and extreme violence against indigenous communities and environmental rights defenders. Notably, there is a worrisome association between drug trafficking and illegal mining, which is often used for money laundering. Mining on indigenous lands expanded by 625% between 2011 and 2021. According to a study by UNODC Brazil, between 2020 and 2022, 65% of all gold notified as originating in the Tapajós River Basin in the state of Belém, just one region, was considered illegal. In economic terms, irregular production would have generated a profit of approximately 1.3 billion during that period. And during this period, it was estimated that the social environmental losses amounted to 2.5 billion. In the way it can be anyhow translated into money, but just for to have an idea, with damages corresponding to deforestation, river sedimentation, and mercury contamination. The consequences generated by the extraction of gold in the Brazilian Amazon have had disastrous impacts on indigenous territories, with mercury poisoning of rivers and fishes, and an array of severe health-related impacts for indigenous and local communities. In some indigenous territories in Brazil, such as the Munduruku and Yanomami, between 50 and 90% of the population suffer from mercury poisoning. These activities have also contributed to environmental degradation throughout the entire Amazon basin, exacerbating land disputes and increasing violence. Indigenous populations register an increase of over 20% in homicidal violence between 2009 and 2019, not to mention suicide rates and serious health problems. I think it was worldwide, the photographs of the Yanomami children, emaciated bodies, that's what we found in the first moments of the government. And that was basically about illegal mining and poisoning by mercury. On the other hand, while the law enforcement apparatus of the state is increasing its presence in the Amazon region, we have all learned, as Rebeca mentioned and explained more broadly, we have all learned over the last decade that police repression is not a way to promote long-standing and sustainable results. And it comes with the risk of disproportionately impacting already marginalized communities, exacerbating social inequalities. It is not a coincidence that we are witnessing an increase in incarceration rates of indigenous individuals, increasingly recruited into drug trafficking due to their knowledge of the forest and ability to walk through its vast extensions more swiftly. This reality underscores the urgent need for development-focused drug policies to address the root causes of these challenges, increase the resilience of indigenous communities, and safeguard our natural heritage, the well-being of those who inhabit these lands, and contribute to the urgent mitigation of climate change. While we celebrate this year the 10th anniversary of the UN Alternative Development Principles, we should also reflect on their applicability to this present reality. Brazil's context is not one of the large production, but rather a territory where transnational drug trafficking routes are mainly destined to Europe and Africa, also expanding to other continents. These drug trafficking routes largely cross the territories of the Amazon through intricate webs, concurrently exploiting labor of the most vulnerable groups, as I said, found along the way, including indigenous and other traditional groups, and deteriorating their socioeconomic conditions and opportunities. In response to these pressing concerns, Brazil is committed to implementing comprehensive strategies aimed at mitigating the adverse effects of drug trafficking and the warlike repression model on our environment and society. So last year, in my secretary, we launched initiatives such as the National Strategy for Promoting Access to Rights for Women, focusing on indigenous women and women of African descent, the National Strategy for Mitigating and Repairing the Impacts of Drug Trafficking on Indigenous Population, and the National Strategy for Racial Justice and Drug Policy. This collaborative endeavors aims to empower marginalized groups, providing access to opportunities and services while dismantling the grip of criminal networks. We also launched the Center for Studies on Drugs and Community Social Development in partnership with UNODC and UNPD in Brazil in order to produce studies and pilot projects to support our public policies. We had a side event. It was the first side event of the center here at the CND. We also convened a high-level segment last week, engaging in a constructive debate on the environmental impact of the Amazon, and also how we need development-led policies. We're supported by Germany, Peru, Colombia, Norway, France, UNDC, and also a Brazilian civil society organization. Recognizing the need for development-oriented drug policies, the National Secretary for Drug Policy under the Brazilian Ministry of Justice, we are now with the challenge of structuring broad multi-sectoral alternative development plans focused especially on youth living in urban peripheries and indigenous communities, the latter with a large focus in the Amazon. And I think all we have been discussing here are very important for us as we draw our public policies. I really hope this debate continuing, and I really think this alliance that we're establishing here will will lead us to a more equitable and sustainable future. Thank you.
Okay, Daniela is online and she's adjusting her camera. She got off the bus. She's just getting online. Thank you so much so far from all of our speakers. And I think moving forward, we're going to need a really robust and really brave intersection between these two movements, the climate space, and those who work in ecological justice and political ecology, or all kinds of backgrounds that work with the drug policy movement. Rebecca and I are from the climate justice space, and we can assure you that no one is talking about drugs in the climate justice space.
True.
So it is absolutely crucial that we get the work that we are doing in this space into the COP and into the biodiversity COP. Like we've got an aspect, a missing piece of their puzzle, and they've got a missing piece of our puzzle. And it's completely bonkers that we are not aligned. As we move to, we talk about human rights, and climate justice is human rights. It's the big fruit bowl that's going to hold the whole thing together. So it's really important that we jump out of our lanes. And she's in. Yay! Okay, great. Welcome, Daniela. Oh, making time. Frozen. A little bit frozen.
Hi guys, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, turn off the camera, maybe.
She's joining from Acre State in the border with Peru, and they are being hit by heavy floods in the last month. So they are in a very difficult situation over there in general.
Yes, hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Video off.
Clemmie, should I share the presentation or you guys are sharing already?
Yeah, share your presentation, please.
Okay.
For everybody, thank you. Number 19, yeah.
I say we have 6 minutes before we have to give the room back.
Okay, great. Have 6 minutes, Daniela. When you're ready.
Okay, sorry. I'm really trying everything. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna be quick. First of all, thank you, and I'm so sorry. Everything here is very hectic. It's still trying to recover from the floods. Probably most of our coalition members have said the most important things because we have fantastic people in this group. But let me talk a little bit about our reality here, especially living the border. My name is Daniela Diaz. I'm a geographer and I'm a project coordinator here in SLS Amazonia, a non-governmental organization. We are based in the state of Acre in Brazil, in south of Amazon, in the border between Bolivia and Peru. So first of all, I think the main thing of my presentation is talking about the policy-making process being more integrated with the different sectors. And this is the only way that we must actually be able to achieve some environmental justice, especially for traditional and indigenous people. It is very well known for all of us how environmental crimes has been driven by illegal activities such as illegal mining, illegal logging, and leading us to this scenario of deforestation and territorial violation of traditional communities, and which have grown, of course, a huge concern, especially considering the Amazon's vital role in containing climate change. However, we also no longer must only discuss environmental crimes, but we also must understand the complex economy system that have been grown in activities in Amazon territory that fuels um, violence and deforestation. Especially, I took this from the research from Amazon Watch, which is a great organization that have been doing fantastic research over this kind of activities here. And how organized crimes have found in such activities a new way of territory expansion of illicit crimes, such as drug trafficking, of course, and leading to high rates of violence. And we also have a governmental approach that is based in repression and militarization, that has lack of integration of policy making, and also not considering Amazon as a hub territory for criminal economies in Latin America, and has led us to very ineffective public policies and also too much money expending in war on drugs that have been not so effective as it should. And all this violence can be seen by the indicators. So we are talking about in 2022, the intentional violence death rate reached 33 deaths by 100,000 population, for example. And it is time already to discuss it's time to build a strategic debate about policy to maintain forests, considering the connection of criminal organizations in the region and what is the real profile of those organization activities with environmental crimes. Um, for example, we are also talking about how that there is this lack of integration when we are talking about huge projects inside Amazon rainforest that actually um, are basically leading to our infrastructure for illicit crimes. For example, here in our region, as we are in the border between Peru, there is this project of building a road that goes through indigenous communities, traditional communities, even we are talking about isolated indigenous communities, also going inside the national park Serra do Divisor, which have been also a region that increase of violence by criminal organizations, which leads the city of Cruzeiro do Sul to Pucallpa in Peru, in the region of Ucayali, however, which have not been actually discussed by the policymakers in the region, is how the region of Ucayali has identified between 2020 and 2022 63 illegal airplane tracks for drug trafficking, and how the region has turned out to be taking over about drug trafficking and illegal logging, and how the criminal organizations have found, especially in illegal logging, a new way of expansion of the territory and also a new way to trap indigenous communities and traditional communities. So just to finish, this means of integration is still can be shown about some kind of national projects of infrastructure that has been promising as a national and economic integration with other countries. And well, to actually finish, this is also means that it's taking the security sector and environmental sectors, especially locally, and the policymakers out of the comfort zone and start to build more integrated strategy of action to save Amazon rainforest in long terms, and also being able to use resources in effective actions to take over illicit activities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to our co-sponsors. It's a really, as we've made, I hopefully made the point, a really important area of work. And we're going to be here for a few moments. We're going to be pushed out, but we'll be in the corridor. If you want to talk to us, please do. And thank you so much, specifically to Daniela, who's really made a big effort to get here. So I appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Big round.